Nuclear power plants in America and Europe depend on Russian uranium. America's nuclear power plants imported most of the uranium needed to operate them during the past year, from 3 major countries, including Russia, despite the repercussions of the invasion of Ukraine. This came despite America's production of concentrated uranium, U-308, rising nearly 10 times over the past year, on an annual basis, to reach 194,000 pounds, according to a report issued by the U.S. Energy Information Administration today, Thursday, August 17, 2023. During the past year, 5 facilities in the United States produced concentrated uranium, U-308, yet White Mesa production represented about 84% of the total. It is noteworthy that in 2021, the White Mesa facility tended to process rare earth elements, and did not produce uranium. Nuclear power plants in America depend on imports. In 2022, America's nuclear power plants will import 95% of the enriched uranium needed to operate, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Canada topped the list of countries that exported the most uranium to America during the past year, with a rate of 27%, thanks to the large and high-quality reserves it possesses, followed by Kazakhstan with 25% and Russia with 12%. In 2021, Russian uranium accounted for 28% of the total fuel used in nuclear power plants in America, followed by the United Kingdom, Germany and the Netherlands by about 17%, 13% and 11%, respectively. Despite the United States' tendency to ban imports of oil, natural gas, and coal from Russia in response to the invasion of Ukrainian lands, it did not impose sanctions on uranium imported from Moscow, which indicates America's inability to dispense with it now. The U.S. Department of Energy aims to increase the country's production of domestic uranium, to reduce dependence on imports. The import of uranium used in nuclear power plants in America is due to the fact that it is more abundant and cheaper in other countries. In the 1940s and 1950s, the United States provided financial incentives to help stimulate America's production of uranium domestically. With the end of financial incentives and the decline in its prices, uranium production in America decreased dramatically in the 80s. Which prompted the country to import most of the fuel supplied to American nuclear plants. Shipments of Russian uranium are still making their way to America and Europe without difficulty, unlike their counterparts in oil after Moscow invaded Ukraine early last year, 2022. State-owned company Rosatom also continues to dominate the global nuclear fuel market. It alone meets half of the global demand for enriched uranium. Russia's control aroused the jealousy of Western countries to rebuild uranium processing capabilities, which declined in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan in 2011. Russian company Rosatom. The spread of Russian uranium goes beyond the economic profits that the industry generates for the Kremlin. Rather, it goes beyond it to be a geopolitical center of gravity that gives Russia power that America and Europe do not possess. The Russian company Rosatom is involved in all stages of the nuclear energy supply chain, from the extraction of uranium ore to its enrichment and delivery. The company's activity also extends to manufacturing, installing, operating and maintaining nuclear reactors in 54 countries, through 330 subsidiaries and a large number of engineers, technicians, and workers. And unlike the global companies that rushed out of the nuclear energy sector in the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster, Rosatom seized the opportunity. Some European companies went bankrupt, including the French Areva SA, the US Enrichment Co., and the Westinghouse Electric Company. On the other hand, Russia succeeded in building a huge fleet of nuclear reactors, and provided generous financing for foreign projects. There are currently 330,000 Rosatom workers preparing Russian uranium to power old reactors in Eastern Europe, and inside Russia. The company is also evaluating 33 new power stations in 10 countries, including China and India, where there is no way to conclude new contracts for future decades. During the year following the Russo-Ukrainian War, Rosatom's exports of Russian uranium increased by more than a fifth, and new contracts were signed in emerging markets. Rosatom's influence in Europe. Russia meets about 30% of the demand for enriched uranium within the European Union. Some countries of the former Soviet Union in Eastern Europe still use Russian uranium supplied by Rosatom to power hydropower reactors, VVER, a series of several pressurized water reactor designs, built during the Cold War. And those reactors have exceeded their permissible operating life, which means that the chances of new companies entering to compete with Rosatom there are slim. On the other hand, the American company Westinghouse succeeded in concluding contracts to supply the Ukrainian VVER reactors with uranium. However, Ukraine still relies on its stock of nuclear fuel supplied by Rosatom, so Kiev will not be able to fully diversify its supplies until later in the decade. Bulgaria, the Czech Republic and Finland are also looking for other suppliers, but it will take years to get out of Russian hands. Nuclear trade between Russia and America. The volume of nuclear trade between Russia and the United States grew in the aftermath of the Cold War. Moscow provided Washington with 500 tons of Russian uranium to operate American reactors. After that, Russia continued to play its role as the main supplier of uranium mining, milling, conversion and enrichment for U.S. power plants. This Russian hegemony raises concerns about possible supply disruptions, similar to the disruptions in oil and gas supplies that resulted in a global energy crisis. Washington is still 95% dependent on exports. What is more worrying is the complete reliance on the highly concentrated low-enriched Russian uranium used in the new generation of reactors, which are the small standard reactors. And in the past year 2022, Russian enriched uranium accounted for about a quarter of the purchases of U.S. nuclear reactors, according to U.S. government data. Western attempts to resist. With nuclear power recently back in the limelight to meet electricity demand amid calls to phase out polluting fossil fuels, the sector in Europe and North America has seen a slow rise back to the global fuel stage. And the United States and Canada pledged in March 2023 to rebuild nuclear capabilities. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, and France reached an agreement to develop separate supply chains apart from Russia. The U.S. Congress is also considering imposing domestic restrictions on Russian uranium imports, and has provided investment incentives to attract new suppliers. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act passed by President Joe Biden last year, 2022, also included a $700 million support package to develop domestic fuel supplies for advanced reactors. The U.S. Department of Energy and Centrus Energy are working to develop a pilot project on uranium used in standard reactors. In Europe, nuclear fuel companies, including Urenco Limited and Orano SA, have launched to build new capabilities to wean investors away from Russian supplies. According to industry estimates, it is expected that it will take about 5 years for Russian supplies to be abandoned. In contrast, Rosatom in June 2023 derided attempts to abandon Russian supplies, saying they resembled a Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein's novel by English writer Mary Shelley tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a scientist who creates a monstrous creature and then searches for a way to escape from it. Russia's Rosatom emphasized that no single Western country could compete with it commercially, and said it was aware of the risks and would protect its interests.